Just go down one slide. Oh, down arrow, down arrow, down arrow. Down arrow.
Oh, well, down. We're down there. Okay.
Glasses for that.
Different. Tony asked me to talk about the fragility of British industry. I couldn't have had a nicer task, having spent. I spent a decade at Ford Motor Company sorting out suppliers, delinquent suppliers. We started off with 5,600 suppliers to powertrain operations, just in Ford of Britain, and at the end of it, we finished up with 1,500. So it wasn't Margaret Thatcher that destroyed British industry; it was Ford Motor Company. But these were the companies that I bumped into on my travels. The first one, my first task was BSA, famous for their guns and drums and whatever else. They'd taken their holding company, Manganese Bronze, who are infamous for destroying the black taxi cab industry. They had an order for Ford for making blocking rings, synchronized blocking rings. And they put it onto their machines and found it they couldn't make it. Couldn't make it dimensionally, or they couldn't make it in terms of density. So the whole program, the 1981 Ford Escort program, was going to come to a halt because we couldn't get these parts. Well, not one's parts right to drawing anyway. So they shipped it to BSA, which was one of their other companies, had bigger machines. They didn't have the right tooling because it had been tooled up for these other machines, and they couldn't make them very well anyway. So we took the factory over for 18 months in terms of quality and production planning and all the rest of it. But it showed me that the fragility in that organisation was not really knowing what their capabilities were in detail and taking on commercial. Lucas, sadly to say, I worked for Lucas for 3 years, and Lucas should have been a long-term player in terms of the car industry and aerospace industry. But they were allowed to be sucked into the asset strippers by a guy called Verity, I think his name. He was an ex-finance director at Ford, and he bought Lucas, and they asset stripped it and passed it. It all broke it up into pieces, and it's in the hands of 1,000 people these days. But of course, what they did, the management were well trained at Ford, very good management training there, but they understood nothing about what was going on the shop floor, and that was a weakness. And trying to get them to change was an even bigger task. Sadly to say, they're no more, and that they're in the fragility weakness there was much associated with management using finance as a means of managing the business instead of the products that they were making. CB, again, similar situation. We were a very successful component part manufacturer who were taken apart by hostile takeovers. Now, Vickers is an interesting company because we wouldn't have done too well in the 2 world wars without Vickers making guns and tanks and all sorts of things. Back 20 years ago, they lost a big contract to Kuwait on replacing battle tanks. And they didn't lose it because of money, they didn't lose it because of all the normal things. They lost it because the product they were trying to sell just wasn't good enough. And I think that there's a theme in British industry that we're not good at making things that people want. GEC, well, I'm surrounded by GEC people here today, but it was a classic example of how management, the succession management to Lord Weinstock managed to lose £4 billion in cash in 18 months. And it's because they didn't understand what they were buying. They were buying dot-coms by the dozen, and pouring the money in when these businesses hadn't been improved in terms of their capacity to turn out profit. Very soon, it was all gone. Leyland Rover is a story in its own right that I'm reminded of the words of the BMW chairman who says, "I can't do here in England what I do in Munich." He said, the people I have around me are just not capable of meeting the technical levels of what we're trying to produce. And that was his reason for ending the relationship with Austin Rover in Birmingham, Solihull. ICI, I don't know a great deal. All I know is that a once great company was split up into pieces and sold off, and we no longer have a dominant chemical industry where once they were a world-class business that made a great deal of income for the UK and employed an awful lot of people in the northeast. At the same time, the German chemical industry is prospering. They dominate the European markets. So whatever the causes were, it wasn't successful. And of course, there are many, many more. And the whole point of saying that as a starter is that manufacturing used to be 23% of our gross domestic product. It's now down to about 12%. And Germany's gross domestic profit increase is in the manufacturing sector. In other words, where we're making improvements to our GDP out of property, they're making it out of manufacturing, and there's more profit out of manufacturing than there is out of property. More national income, that is. A quick look at the Industrial Revolution. These words are the words of Keynes. Keynes said that banks were once the servants to industry. These days they're the masters to industry, and that role has to be reversed if we're going to be successful. The second point, the decline of the family business. One of the great strengths of the Germans is that the missile system there is based on family businesses, and those businesses have been in their hands for more than 7 decades or so. Most of our family businesses, with the exception of GKN, have disappeared, and they're in the hands of finance people and not in the families that made them successful. And I think this is my view, based on my experience, that industry suffered from poor technical education of the people who are actually running the factories. And it goes back to the past century, where most of those family businesses, after 2 generations, went on into classical education and other things, and left the factories to run themselves with the hands of the practical people or the long-suffering foreman. Those businesses suffered from a lack of technical expertise on how to make things properly on the shop floor. Just a quick, among the forces of destruction identified by Deming was this subject of, from school onwards, too much is put in the hands of data analysis that is suspect, followed on by the merit systems that apply all the way from school all the way through to bonuses and piecework and all that sort of stuff, which is detrimental to the performance of those businesses. That goes on today in terms of numerical goals and the analysis spreadsheet before lunch, that sort of analysis of businesses. So all in all, these all serve to be forces of destruction. Looking at markets, fragile markets, there's no economic policy, this goes for our current government, which will ensure the sale of poor quality goods. If we don't have the goods to produce, we're never going to sell them, no matter how good or no matter what the economic policy would be. And that quality of product depends on factors beyond government control. Government don't have an influence over the things that really matter. And talking about the economy is bunk. This is a quotation from a Japanese attending one of the political conferences. He said, "What's really is important is that companies produce reliable products and services that people want to buy." And a good example of that is JCB, who was in the 60s. They were being forced into British Leyland, and he resisted that. Then they tried to get him to sell the business. He resisted that, and a business that at that time was worth £33 million is now worth £33 billion. A great success, and he's managed to do it despite the system. just as an analysis across, you can't see that, can you? Of the diseases that are faced by industry, this lack of constancy of purpose, the chasing the short-term profits, no long-term strategies, short-term thinking, lack of systems thinking I like to bring out, the mobility of management. People think somehow or other they can run from one job to the next one and then make a short-term gain and then leave behind them chaos. A good example of that is Mark Bolan, who's gone to Marks and Spencer's. He spent 3 years at Morrison's, did nothing really to improve the performance of that business, but is doing the same at M&S. Management by financials alone is a disease that most businesses suffer from, and the other couple of the excessive liability and warranty costs, or people living with them, and the failure of customers and suppliers to work together. So in terms of the need for anti-fragility, no one can deny that there's a need there, and we've had a morning of looking at that. A reputation for excellence is hard to achieve but easy to destroy. So the reputation is a fragility factor. How will it affect the reputation of the business? And looking at the UK in general, I'm talking about industry now, we were once known for its excellence and inventiveness and commercial success. We're now known for technical incompetence, inability to deliver on time, and slow on the uptake. I'm not looking at people in this room, I'm just looking at industry in general. That's definitely a factor that has to be addressed. And the bottom line, of course, is that we're hardly world class anymore. So just to sum it all up, Keynes was right. Finance has to be the servant, not the master. We need to build robust, sustainable business systems and anti-fragility. Wherever possible, deploy leadership to the lowest possible level. By that, you put the responsibility of the processes back into the hands of the people that know most about them. Develop fail-safe, capable processes, and promote employee engagement, innovation, and continual improvement. And the last one is, don't forget the 15-year rule, which is management forget everything every 15 years. And people normally say, oh, it doesn't take 15 years. I say, I know that, but I'm just giving them 15 years for luck. But anyway, that's my quick summation of the industrial situation we face